You're listening to Bigfoot Society, and I'm Jeremiah Byron. Tonight's story isn't about a hiker or a hunter. It's about a 13-year-old girl on a quiet Alabama farm who looked out her bedroom window one November night and locked eyes with something that wasn't supposed to exist. For 2 weeks in 1972, Sandra saw it again and again in the chicken house, by the pond, and once just 6 inches away, separated only by a thin pane of glass. And it didn't run or growl, it just watched. This is a first-hand account of terror, family silence, and a farm that became a buffet for something wild, and decades later, it's still happening. This is the story of Sandra from North Alabama, so stay with us. All right, Bigfoot Society, we've got the privilege of talking to Sandra today. Sandra's an individual that I've reached out to through Facebook, and she did agree to coming on the show to share what she's experienced down there. First starting in North Alabama over the years. But Sandra, it's great to have you on the show today. How's it going?
It's great to be here. Everything's going great. Can't complain.
Awesome. Yeah, I know there's a lot to go over, a lot of things to share. So, I'm going to go ahead and make sure that you have all the time that you need, and we'll maybe be talking along the way as you're sharing, but feel free to take things from here, Sandra, and bring us back to when this all started happening for you.
Okay. Well, the first sighting that I had was in November, the second week of November of 1972. I had just turned 13 years old, and we lived on a 180-acre farm in North Alabama. Some people say North Central, but it's really more North Alabama. We're about an hour and 15 minutes from the Tennessee line. I can give you a little brief description of the farm. We had chickens, chicken houses, cattle. I can't guess the number of head, about 100 goats, 5 fish ponds stocked with catfish, bass, and brim. We just had a plethora of food. We had a huge, probably over an acre garden every year. Plus, Dad had a hog operation. I think we had just started that at that time. And so it was a nice, cool, crisp autumn evening. And being a teenager, I like to go off by myself. And I watched, if people listening remember Dragnet, I like to go back to my room and watch Dragnet while I did my homework. Well, Mom called back, but yelled back and said it was time to get ready for bed. So I started getting dressed, put my pajamas on, and I felt like something was looking. You know how you get that feeling that somebody's looking at you? And I just had a feeling somebody was staring at me. And grandmother, I shared a room with her, and we had the windows cracked about 5 inches at the top, and she had these voile, which are very sheer curtains, yellow curtains hanging over, just to get the air through the house. And I stepped over to the window and looked, and there was this huge head, big eyes. And I thought at the time that my immediate thought was that it was our neighbors pranking me. There was 2 teenage boys. One was a couple years older than me, and one was a couple years younger. And I yelled at them and called them by name and told them to go home. Well, when I yelled, it blinked its eyes. And when it blinked its eyes, I could tell it was not a mask. It was a real creature. The eye itself was very large and black, but when it blinked, you could see the tiniest bit of white in the corners. And then I realized that it had I just kind of froze. My face was probably 5 to 6 inches from its face, because I got right up in its face when I was thinking it was the neighbor, and I'm screaming at it. It never moved. It didn't run. It just blinked. And it had a nose. I've always compared it to the pictures of the Neanderthal man. It was totally black. It was, of course, dark outside, so I really can't tell you the shape of the head. And initially, I thought that the head was smaller than I now realize that it is. So it had to be at least a basketball, if not larger, because we had single pane windows over a single pane. It didn't have any of the, the divisions for the panes in the window. And we initially, when I had spoke to another group, I had said that I thought it was 6.5 feet tall, and they pointed out how houses were built back then. And you being a childhood memory, I didn't think about that. Okay, I'm sorry. My son is baking cookies. He has
You're good.
autism, and that's what he's doing.
You're good.
And so, okay. And they pointed out that, they built them with the concrete blocks, probably 3 or 4 up for the crawl space under the house. And then they had a rim joist. So I'm kind of breaking from the story explaining this. My husband and I rode back over to the house I grew up in. It's still there. And the only difference is they changed the color of it. So they were right. It has the blocks and the rim joist. So that adds about 2 feet to the height of what I thought it was. So that put it to being close to 8 feet tall. And that really put a shudder through me. That scared me even that much more. But it stayed there. It didn't move. I was afraid to say anything to my dad because I was afraid of him going outside and being injured by it or something. So I didn't say anything. I went to bed. Grandma came in, went to bed. I kept moving the curtain with my toe and seeing it standing there. You could see its silhouette in the moonlight. I don't understand why it never moved. It sounds kind of crazy, but eventually I noticed it was gone. The next day was a Thursday night. I even remember the night of the week. It was a Thursday because I went to school the next day and I was scared to death to go home thinking that thing would be somewhere around there. I went over under the window and looked. We had holly bushes grandmother had planted up kind of close to the house, but you could see where the grass was pressed down, probably a good 24-inch kind of area there where something had shuffled around, but you couldn't see, footprints or that kind of thing. I don't remember that. I just remember seeing the grass mashed down. So that confirmed to me that there was something there. My job was to go to the chicken houses after I got home from school and walk the chickens. And we would do that no matter what the season, but I had to go walk in. Sounds bad, but you had to pick up the deceased chickens and take them down to the chicken pit, blah, blah, blah. And, fast forward. I'm sorry. I'm a little nervous, so bear with me, Jeremiah. Friday night, it didn't come back. Saturday night, that thing was back at the window. I don't remember it staying as long, but I remember it being back in the same place and watching I watched it again in the moonlight. Until I guess I went to sleep, it walked away or something. Then the first part of the next week, at school again, I was in the chicken house walking the chickens one afternoon, and I felt a shadow passing over me on the west side. And I looked, and there was the black figure walking down the side of the chicken house. All I could see was probably from what I would call its upper arm, shoulder area down to where the window stopped, which is probably waist or so high. It walked to the end of the chicken house. We had our doors open on the chicken houses, large doors propped back, and it stood there where the screen wire was looking in at the chickens. It scared me so bad, I got in the furnace room. And I got down behind the wall that we had built there, and I'd look up and back down. I'd stand up and back down to see when it left. Well, the chickens had made a little semicircle because when you startle them, it's kind of interesting how chickens do, but they made a little circle out from that opening, and it was just standing there, not making any effort to tear through the wire or do anything. So finally it turned, and when it started down the fence row back towards the woods, I ran out and got on my motorcycle and went back to our house, our little mini bike motorcycle thing. Went to the house. Well, that terrified me, and I did not go back and do the other 2 chicken houses. I was scared to death to go down there. Again, I didn't tell anybody. Then Wednesday or Thursday night of that week, it was back. Now, my dad also did hay all over the county and neighboring counties. But at that time of the year, he was combining soybeans, and Dad baled the soybean fields for fodder, I guess, for the cattle. I don't know exactly what he did with all of it, but they were still hauling some, the bales of soybean hay. So I was left home in the afternoon to do laundry and different things by myself. And Mom and my brothers, my baby brother would ride with her, and my other brother helped because he was, even though he was only 11 years old, he was big enough to handle hay bales on the truck. So they had all left to go haul some of the bean bales in. And I walked over to the front door, and there at the neighbor's spillway, the pond was probably a little over 1/10 of a mile from our front door. There it stood, really, and I remember it being really tall, solid black. It wasn't real, like people say they're 4 feet wide, 5 feet wide, whatever. I don't remember it being that big. I guess maybe 3.5 wide when I saw it at the chicken house and down there. It was standing at the spillway, didn't do anything, wasn't, it was just standing there, and then it turned and walked down the backside of it, and it was a really steep dam, and that led down into the woods. And that was all that I saw it as. So roughly 5 sightings of this, I'm assuming the same creature within a 2-week period of time. That has stuck with me my entire life. And, I tried to not think about it and, push it back in the back of the memories and things. But now that I've gotten older and through the years, I thought, we really had a good setup. They could get deceased chickens out of the pit. They had, I don't know whatever happened to like dead calves and stuff when Dad found them, stillborns. No idea if he buried them or just, I hate to say it, tossed them over the fence or something, but they had that. They had the fish ponds. They had our fruit trees. We had an enormous pear tree down in the center of one of our pastures. We had plum trees all over. We had peaches, apples. And like I said, we had a huge garden. We had free-range chickens out back. Just lots and lots of stuff that they could survive on. It's been kind of a lifelong fascination, I guess, trying to learn a little bit more about them. But the area that we were in also bordered the back part of our property. The railroad track ran through. And between the railroad tracks and our property, there was also a creek, not a huge one, maybe 4 feet wide, something like that. And then, there was a lot of farm land around us. Our neighbor had cattle. They had 2 huge ponds. The people across the railroad tracks were friends of the family, and we knew they had cattle and they had ponds. So it was really a pretty good area. And we had caves down behind our home. My dad used to take us walking down the tracks, and he would tell us stories about the caves that Civil War soldiers had hidden things in them or hidden there themselves during the Civil War. But there was one cave in particular that he would tell us not to go in. And he had told several different stories about it. He told us that there was things that were found in there from the war. Then he told us not too far in that there was a drop-off that you would drop and you'd get hurt if you didn't know what you were doing. And then he told us later that we just did not need to go in that cave at all. I don't know if Dad knew something. I know that my great, I think, grandfather was full-blooded Cherokee. And Dad used to every once in a while say, when we'd hear something about him being around, he said that Granddad said that they traveled the Appalachian trails, the Appalachians, that they migrated. And that's about all. And my mom said that she don't remember hearing Dad talk about it, but Mom didn't like anything that had to do with science. She considered it science fiction. Anything out of the norm, she was opposed to hearing about or talking about. Now, around the same time that this happened to me, I remember at dinner one night, Dad telling about, and we heard it on the news, a church somewhere in the North Alabama area that was having a revival, and one had stuck its head in the window during a singing, and they like the third night of the revival, and they canceled the revival and supposedly went looking for it. So I don't know exactly where that was at, but I think it was. I don't know if you're familiar with Greg House of Woodwalkers, but we live, I don't know, 15, 20 miles apart, but we think it's somewhere between us. He lives over close to the Bankhead Forest, and I kind of live at the edge of the Bankhead Forest.
Oh, sure.
And we think it's kind of in that area. But he's looked for information, I've looked for information, we haven't found that. But we heard that supposedly the men of the church went looking for it, but we never heard that they found anything. Fast forward a little bit, later on the teenage years while I was still at home, there was not too far from where we lived a huge flea market. And we went down, there was a couple that was there working on their booth. It was a small building, built kind of like a chicken house, honestly. It was a metal building with open doors on the ends, the big swing outdoors. And they were there working while the flea market was closed, and they had one that appeared in the doorway. I guess just hearing them make noise, it stuck its head in, and then not far from there was an incident where there was one that went into a chicken house. But my mom and dad both went down, and my dad wanted to talk to the people about it. And I remember standing there listening to the man and woman tell the story about being scared to death about, that big hairy thing standing in the door. So there's been several sighted in the general area that I grew up in. No one else that I know of ever mentioned it. My brothers used to tease me about the one that they saw at the church because I didn't tell anyone about seeing this until I was an adult. People have a tendency to make fun of you. When I told my brother, he didn't have a problem believing it because when he was a teenager, they'd heard something in the woods down below one of the ponds when they were camping and said that they unloaded all of their weapons into the woods. But my mom didn't believe it. She went so far as to say that she believed I was lying to her about it. And I said, Mom, I'm not. You brought me up not to lie. I'm not lying. This happened. I was just afraid to say anything back then because I didn't want Daddy going out and hunting it. And then in 2012, we were at church, and a gentleman that, as the crow flies, lives, his property would be due northeast of where I grew up, 1.5 miles, and his son was hunting and had an encounter with one. So that kind of, to me, proves that they're still in the area. I mean, I know it's 12 years later, but apparently the caves around there, the environment is something that they like. So, and I can fast forward to what's been going on around here if you want to.
So let's discuss about what you've shared so far, and then we'll get up maybe to, it sounds like you have current day stuff going on as well.
A little bit, yes.
Okay. So definitely have a few questions. So a lot of people in the community were seeing this. Would you guys call them boogers down there, or how would you refer to them?
Well, my grandmother, as we were growing up, she would tell us not to be out too late at night because the woolly boogers would get us. And, most people call them boogers. I just call them Bigfoot because that's what the only thing I knew to identify them as was Bigfoot or Sasquatch, but Bigfoot's what I call them. Now I refer to them as boogers, but my grandmother did use the expression woolly boogers. I never questioned that as a child. Parents and grandparents tell kids all kinds of things to get them to stay around home when they have no business going off anywhere else. Mm-hmm. But she would say that, don't go out here or there. The woolly booger will get you. So I'm wondering if that's was an expression that they used to describe it. And now they were very tight-lipped, my grandmother and her sister. That was just the two in the family. And they just didn't talk much about things that they experienced growing up. They didn't talk much about their family. She just didn't elaborate on a lot of stuff. if you tried to ask her questions about family, she'd say, I've got all the family I need right here in this house. So we just didn't ask her a lot of things. If Grandma said a woolly booger was going to get you, then that's what was going to get you. No matter what that thing was, it was going to get you. We played in the yard some at night. We had Daddy put up a light out and a basketball goal out on a big old oak tree that we could go out and shoot hoops as teenagers, as young teenagers and preteens, and play out there. And we had swings and anything kids wanted to play with in the yard, but we didn't stay out real late. It's kind of like kids today, they don't go outside and play out like we did, but that's all we had. Go out and sit in the swings and talk to the neighbors, or go fishing and fish till dark, or that kind of thing. I don't ever remember seeing anything around the ponds, hearing anything around our ponds. But Dad didn't ever talk about them. Now, my uncle was in, my great uncle, he was a school teacher, and he also did a lot of home construction. And he had a place that he would go and get rocks down on a mountain about 2 miles below where we lived. And he would get stones to like use in chimneys and stuff, and some good clean sand. And there was a cave there that he would go in and get cool water to drink when he was there working. And his daughter told me a couple years back that it had been several weeks. He'd gotten busy with school, and he was always doing continuing education. And he'd gotten very busy with school, and it had been a couple of months since he'd been down to gather rocks and sand. When he went back, he couldn't get into the cave to get the water. Something had piled rocks at the entrance, and he couldn't get back in there. And that was about 2 miles from where I grew up.
Wow. Okay, so this area is just crazy. Yeah.
I would say a good 2 mile radius, maybe 3. I mean, maybe a month and a half ago, we have a road that we cut through from one main road to another one. And my husband had pulled in and pulled off to the road to go and do his man thing. And as soon as he stepped out of our vehicle, we heard 2 whoops. And this is the same area that cave is in up on the mountain that my uncle, many years ago, used to go get stones. And my husband turned around and he said, "Did you hear that?" I said, "Yeah, would you hurry and let's get out of here?" I said, "It doesn't like you using its property. Let's go." But they're obviously still around at that area. And see, I've moved where I'm at now. I'm probably 5 miles, 6 miles from where I grew up. And I'm in an area with a lot of water and things of that nature, but we'll get there whenever you're ready to get there.
Right. Absolutely. Was there any community backlash after the situation with the Bigfoot looking into the church revival? Was it a tent or an actual church building? Do you know?
It was a church.
Okay.
They said that the windows were up and that it looked in while they were singing. And I suppose the music, the singing, the noise probably attracted it. But there was a woman and a child turned around and looked and saw it and screamed. And then that's when they disbanded. And they said that I think it was like third night of the revival, if I remember correctly. And they didn't continue because back then revivals would run a full 7 nights. And they didn't have any more revival. The men went out looking for it and didn't find it. So,
oh man, someone's got to know that story.
I think the newspaper even may have carried something. I'm not positive, but I know that there was a lot of talk about it.
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
I know that.
Wow.
And there's supposedly, I'm not sure if it was in the same era, an incident over in Mississippi, not too awfully far, west of us, that the same type of thing happened, but I don't think it had such a good ending. But, we never heard any more about that area. And as far as the flea market, people were really curious to hear these people talk about it, because, I would see people. We went there every weekend. My dad was just an addict. Every single weekend. We were there on Saturday and Sunday, walking it, talking to everybody, and he knew most of the people there. And there was a lot of people that went by to see these people that saw it there. And it was during, like, within probably 2 years, I'd say, of when I saw the one on our property. I'm always saying, why didn't I see it? Asking, why didn't I see it again? Why didn't it come back? Why did it come just to that window? I was, I would have said preteen, but I just turned 13. Some people have theories about them being attracted to women during certain times of the month. We're all adults here, so I would say that I had just started puberty, not too long before that. So maybe that had something to do with it. I don't know. There's just so many questions I have personally.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I can tell you that I agree with you on both of those. There's been things said to me off air, off record, that make me believe that as well. 100%. There's something to that, where it's like, time of the month / puberty can play a huge part in it. When you had it was so close to your window, and it was like, you're saying 6 feet away. That's really, really close. Do you remember?
6 inches.
No, 6 inches. Sorry. Yeah, that's way different.
6 inches.
6 inches.
There was a glass of paint and a screen between me and it.
So, 6 inches. Do you remember smelling anything, like a smell or anything? No. Wow.
No, I'm glad you asked that. So many people ask me that, and no, I don't remember any odors. I think I'd have remembered it, because since then I have smelled one, but I'm sure I would have remembered that gut-wrenching odor. But no, there was no smell. I remember its face being like leathery looking, a lot of wrinkles. I can't remember seeing hair above the eyebrows. Because it was dark, I do remember seeing eyebrows. I don't remember it being like a protruding eye, like they show the apes protruding out. Right. What do they call that? The pronounced brow. Mm-hmm. I don't remember that. It may have been the angle that we were, being face to face. I don't know. I remember some hair on the cheeks. I do remember, and I'm sorry I forgot to mention, later on, and it had to be after I turned 14, because after Spencer Jameson questioned me a lot, I remembered seeing another one, and probably the same one, I'm guessing. And the reason it had to be after I turned 14, my dad bought me a Honda 70, and I was riding it to the pond and around the chicken houses and stuff, to do chores and things. And as I was coming back from our lower chicken house, we had a large barn, like the house that I grew up in, and then we had an open area out back, a huge blackberry. I used to call it the blackberry mound. It was probably 16 feet long and 12 feet wide. My grandmother had, for lack of a better way of putting it, she kind of tamed wild blackberries into this huge mound of blackberries. We had that there, and then we had her chicken pens, rabbit pens. She also had dogs out there in pens. And then the barn started, and Dad had built an area to bottle feed calves on one end of it. Then we had the open bays where the tractors and the equipment, the hay balers and stuff was stored. Directly behind that was probably 5 stalls for cows, and we had one that was set aside as a makeshift chicken coop. And then we had a cattle catch pen at the end, where when we rounded them up and tagged, new calves and things, he built an area there that was large enough to pretty much accommodate the whole herd. And then we had the catch pen, and then another smaller pen that he could isolate other cows in, and we had catawba worm trees. I don't know if you're familiar with those or not. The trees that they have those caterpillar-like worms on them you fish
Oh,
with.
yeah.
Yeah, we had two of those huge ones out there. I mean, huge ones. And then we had another little open air lean-to type thing on the barn that my grandmother raised night crawlers in. Had 8 to 12 inch high beds on them. Initially, she did her starts for the garden there, and then she converted it to night crawlers. Well, as I was coming back from the third chicken house, I remember seeing it standing in that area. The edge of it was about 6 feet. On the very edge of it was about 6 feet high, maybe 5.5, and then it sloped up to attach to the barn, probably 9 feet at the inner piece of the tin that attached to the barn. And it was hunched over, like its head was over. It couldn't stand up straight. And I just remember as I rode by seeing it and thinking, I got to get to the house. I didn't pay a lot of attention to it. There was no light there. It was black. Like I said, it could have been the same one, but that had to have been close to a year later because I had the motorcycle then. That was a gift Dad gave me for my birthday, the larger bike. Now, another thing, and I don't think I mentioned it, was my grandmother also had old style refrigerator freezers. They campaigned take the doors off, yada, yada, yada for years because kids could get in them and they could. Okay. She had them lined up around the backside of my dad's shop. There was probably 10, maybe a foot and a half between each one, but she had them up on cement blocks, and she had drainage holes in them, and she had them full of either red wigglers or, I guess, night crawlers in them. And then in the evenings, grandmother would sprinkle the top of them with chicken feed, and she would also take scraps from the kitchen of eggshells, different things like that, and sprinkle across the top of them for the worms to feed on. Well, in the evening, right before dark, she would go down and put a cement block on the corner, a big, heavy cement block. It wasn't like I don't know, what are they, 6 inches wide? It was the larger ones. I remember it being they're maybe 12 by 12, I think. She would put those things up there on the corner, and then she would lower the lid, and that was to keep, if it rained during the night, it would keep them from flooding out. Well, we went through a spell where she would go down in the mornings, and the cement block would be on the ground, and the lid would be closed. And she was upset about it because she didn't want the worms, it closed down on the worms for fear of, I guess, I don't know what kind of problems it could have caused if they came to the top. Maybe they overheated or something if she didn't get down there early enough. But she couldn't understand what was taking her blocks and setting them on the ground or knocking them on the ground. It crossed my mind not too long ago, maybe because it was around the same time frame, that thing was coming up and getting the kitchen scraps or eating that chicken feed. Because sometimes it was whole kernel corn, that dry, shell corn that she would throw in there. And we also had a corn crib not too far from there that she threw in there for the worms. Just a thought.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's multiple accounts I can think of right now where something similar to that, like some sort of refrigerator or freezer on a back porch was involved, and that just draws them in. Like there's the account in Oklahoma about 20 years ago, and there's also I believe one in outside of Mount Rainier that I just heard from individual named Tom Powell. But I would say, I mean, the whole farm area, the way you guys had it set up, it's just like a magnet. There's so much food, incredible amount of food.
Yeah. Smorgasbord for the Sasquatch.
It's so easy to get too.
Oh yeah. I mean, the dead chickens, the cows, and I know when the pig operation got going, Dad would he had a thing that he incinerated them in, but he didn't light it every day. He would throw them out there, and then into it was the open air type thing, and then he would I guess they had propane burners on the bottom. I don't know. But then he would, light it up and then burn all the carcasses. But he would wait till he got several, to set it. So there was right. And that was not, golly, it was really close to the woods. Our property actually went across the railroad track some, but we didn't fool with the property on that side. It was just a small corner that was over there. But around the edge of it, Dad left wooded areas. We had a good deal of woods on the property. So, but the hog operation, he had set way back out away from the house, so we didn't have that annoying, horrible smell. And it was very, very close. Probably the back of it was 45 feet from the wood line. So, and the end that the incinerator was on was even closer to that. The incinerator was even closer to the woods than the building itself. So, yeah, looking back now, I can see where, they could have fish one night, pigs one night, chicken one night. Being facetious and silly about it, but they just had all kinds of things they could eat.
Oh, yeah. I mean, they would never have to go hunting for deer.
Yeah.
I mean, there'd be no reason to unless they wanted to get deer. But
plenty of fruit and vegetables. Oh, yeah, definitely.
Would you guys ever have anything show up on your property that didn't make sense, like parts of deer or weird objects that were just out of place?
Dad never mentioned that, and I don't remember anything like that as a child. And I had mentioned before, I remember riding with Dad in the truck and us finding stillborn calves. Sometimes a cow would have twins and one wouldn't make it. I honestly can't tell you what Dad did with those. I don't know if those were there, if they were devoured. We had deer, but they didn't come up around the house a lot. You could see them in the back parts of close to the wood line on the property, but we just didn't see a lot of deer inside the fences. So, and Dad wasn't a hunter. He didn't. He would take the boys usually in the fall, squirrel hunting or rabbit hunting or something, just to say he carried them hunting, but he didn't hunt for deer. We had too many cows and pigs and, things of that nature around to keep the freezer stocked. So he was just never a hunter. And I don't ever remember him saying that something had gotten broken into or anything like that. But all of our fields basically all ran back to the woods. Like when we had corn, there was ample fresh corn that they could have gotten into. And I don't know if they had any interest in soybeans, but the same with the soybean fields, they went back to the woods. Occasionally he would drain a pond, and he had one pond that was I guess you'd say a nursery. He had these huge baskets that he'd built with aerators in them that, now he did have one of those pulled from the water one time, pulled out to the edge, but Dad's statement was that he figured somebody had came across the fence and was trying to steal the pound and a half catfish out of it because they were about ready to be dumped into the larger pond. So, thinking back, I don't know. Never did I hear them mention anything about footprints, anything of that nature growing up. I just don't remember anything like that.
Sure.
And honestly, if Dad noticed it, I don't think Jeremiah, he would have said anything in front of my mother because she was just so, we weren't even allowed. This sounds silly maybe to some people, but I was always a Trekkie thanks to my cousin, but we were not allowed to even watch Star Trek in our household because that was so out there. That was just, we just couldn't do it. So Dad just knew what he could and couldn't talk about around Mom. Now, he might have talked about it to neighbors and things like that, but not at home with us.
No, I can definitely get those dynamics. Yeah.
If Mom didn't feel like it was biblical, you didn't talk about it. That's a good way to put it. That the Bible didn't talk about Captain Kirk, and she wasn't going to talk about Captain Kirk.
Well, true. Yeah, the Bible does not talk about Captain Kirk. But on the other hand, the Bible does talk about a lot of really weird stuff, which I've always, found interesting.
Yes, it does.
If you read it with an open mind, and especially as an adult, you're like, whoa, there's some really, really
Genesis
interesting
chapter
things.
6.
There you go. Yeah.
Genesis chapter 6 mentions that it says that giants roamed the earth in those days.
Mm-hmm.
So who's to say that? I mean, we all know the story of the flood. We all know that Noah and his sons repopulated the earth. We don't know the genes that they carried. We have no idea. We don't know what could have, I threw this at my uncle not too long ago. I said, we don't know what bowels of the earth where someone could have hidden. We don't know. Only God knows. We don't know. So.
And the we don't know if it's end days or not, but end days will be like the days of Noah, and it makes you think why it says that, right?
We don't know everything he created. We just don't. And there's so many things that are mentioned that I'm not a scholar. I'm a Christian. I don't fully understand everything that I read. I admit that. I try to ask him for clarification and for wisdom to understand, but then I can read the same verse a half a dozen times and get a different meaning out of it.
Sure.
So,
yeah, absolutely.
I take his word, giants. And we've heard all kinds of stories over the years, and history is filled with them about the giants. And I've read things around here about people having, not too far from where I live now, having seen large, hairy man-beast kill dogs, carry dog head off, cross the road in front of somebody. So you see it all the time. Why doubt that it exists?
Absolutely.
I know what I saw. You can't tell me otherwise. I know what I saw.
It's
that once you see it, it's going to stick with you for life.
I agree. It's one of those things where people start seeing certain things, and then you have to agree. Then everyone has to agree that the Bible is true if you start seeing certain things, right? And I think that might be a reason why some of this gets shut down,
Oh yeah,
out of the news. But that's a whole discussion in itself. So let's move on. I think now might be a good time to move on to you've had some things continue to happen in your life as you get older.
Yes, I moved away from here and lived in a couple of different. I lived in South Alabama for roughly 23 years or so, and then I lived out west for about a year, and we came back and searched all over the county that I grew up in, and finally found a place and bought a home that had been vacant for roughly 3 years. And that was in 2004 is when we moved in here. And the only person that had been on the property that we were aware of in that period of time was a landscaper who kept the yard cut and kept the flower beds in some order as they were trying to sell the property. And my son and I mentioned before, my son is autistic. He was really trying to decide on what bedroom he wanted. There's 3 bedrooms in the home. And on that side of the house, the south end, there's 2 that are basically identical. And he didn't know if he wanted to be on the east side of the house or the west side of the house. He was 9, going on 10 years old. And we were sitting in the bedroom on the west side. He'd finally decided, and we were working on it and setting all of his stuff up, and it was in the spring of 2005. And we were sitting there talking and organizing things, and suddenly we heard this thump, 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 just loud, thunderous footsteps, and it shook the side of the house. And I immediately thought, no, and I had watched programs and was familiar with, like I said, I'd been fascinated most of my adult life with finding out what I could about the Sasquatch, the Bigfoot. And I thought, no, that's the only thing I could think of that could be that heavy that would make something shake. You could tell it was bipedal because of the way it was, the footsteps. Our neighbor had Clydesdales in a pasture a little ways from there. And I knew it wasn't them because, horse steps sounds way different than something bipedal. And it frightened him, and he said, well, should I move to the other bedroom? Because he didn't understand that as it passed the house, it was going to shake the wall in that room too. Well, I went and looked. I didn't see anything. I'd stayed with him a little bit, but I'm sure by the time I got to the front door that it was already in the woods on the other side. And but that occurred. I didn't hear anything else after that. Now, I'm not going to say everything is a Sasquatch, Bigfoot, whatever you want to call him, but that was something large that made my house shake, and it was bipedal. So you can let your mind go where you want your mind to go. Then later on in the summer of that year, my husband, we have a shop, and he had it opened up on both ends. It was hot, and he was working, and he heard a whoop. He knew what he was hearing because he'd heard him on TV by that point. And he came in the house wide-eyed, and he said, "Did you hear that?" And I was preparing dinner, and I said, "No, I didn't hear anything." I was at the kitchen window, and he said, "You did not hear that?" And I said, "No, I didn't hear anything." And then he described what he heard, and I was like, "That's interesting." Now, where we live now, behind our home is wooded. There is a creek. Geographically, there is a number of smaller creeks really small, I guess you'd say streams that feed into this creek. And then it feeds into a larger one on down toward the main highway south of us. And then west of us, you get into, several miles west of us, you get into Bankhead National Forest. But all of this, I don't know if you can hear that noise, but I have somebody that just don't seem to know how to leave me alone at the moment.
Oh, you're great.
Anyway, we have looked at the topographic area, a lot of woods, chicken houses around, not real close to the house, but within a couple of miles. But we just have a lot of watershed, the creeks and streams and stuff around here. Directly down behind my home is the deepest part of this one particular creek. We've had a neighbor, or an old neighbor, that used to fish there. He would tell us that he would go down and he would catch brim, and I don't know what other little fish, but he would just go down and fish just to be fishing. He said he didn't eat them, but we do know that there's fish down there. So if there's anything that's down there, they have a source of fish, and probably crayfish, because, there's crayfish all in the little streams and stuff around here. The 2004 whoop, five whoop, and then we didn't really hear anything else. But now I have apple trees, 2 large ones that were on the property when we moved here, and I planted peach trees that now bear. I have 5 peach trees, and I have 5 more apple trees. I have figs. I have blueberries. My yard is just full of fruits. I also garden. So I have ample food on site. And then we have chickens here that we get eggs from. We've had several incidents over the years that you go, Bigfoot, not Bigfoot. I actually wrote a bunch of stuff down because of, I think I just told you that I was having some memory issues, but thankfully that's getting better. I was trying to see when the next one after 2007 5, because I found it kind of interesting to look and kind of go back over them to see just what all had occurred. We had foster children for a little while, for about 3 years. And the little girl used to say, Papa was looking in the window. And it would be late at night. You could hear her like 11 o'clock, 11:30. And I didn't know. I could never catch anybody looking in her window. So I taught her to say, go away, Papa. Go away. And so I could hear her at 11:30 say, go away, Papa. Go away. When I'd hear her, I would get up and go look. But by the time I got to that side and got to her room where she was at, there wouldn't be anybody out there. I've often wondered if that was one looking in the window at her. You know, I wondered if it could have been somebody. We have a campground not too far from us that, you know, they might have walked, because we've had people that just stroll into our yard that go walking and don't know where they're at. Wondered if maybe there was somebody from over there that could have come over and been looking in. But as I said earlier, not everything is Bigfoot. But I've wondered if that could have been, because as a child and in the dark, if all she could see was the hairy face, she might have equated that with being a pawpaw. She was 2.5, 3 years old, very verbal. Often wondered if she could have. Also during that time, my husband was outside working in a shop on some electronics, and I went out to get him to come in for dinner. And as I went out, he was coming out saying, did you hear the whoop? And I said, no, I did not. I'm sorry. Once again, I missed hearing the whoop. But he declared that he was hearing whoops come out of the woods. Well, then a few years ago, the man that owned the campground decided he was going to fence some of the property that he owned that hadn't been fenced. And my son and I had been picking wild blackberries ever since we lived here, all around the property and down around the edge of this gentleman's property. He's a heating care. So we were picking them. And on the wood line, there was a lot of really large blackberries there that we look forward to getting to pick every year. And he bulldozed all of that down into the woods. We went down and looked just to see how far he cleared back. We took our golf cart and rode over there and just checking it out. Well, we went back the next afternoon to look again. I think my husband didn't go the first time, so he wanted to go the second time. When we went the second time, there was an actual upside-down tree shoved down in the ground on the edge of the pile closest to our house. It looked like a cedar tree that all of the limbs had been just somebody taking their hand and just raked down the tree and broke all the limbs off of it, and then the root ball up in the air. Probably about 8 feet tall. It wasn't enormous, but it was about 8 feet tall and probably 10 inches around, something like that. I'd heard about upside down trees, never seen one, but I saw that one. And you know how you don't think about taking pictures of stuff? I'm sorry. I didn't take one. But to me, that was fascinating. Then we had a dog, a puppy we got in. She's 14 years old, so that would have been 2011. She got out and went down in the woods. The woods were about 30 feet from our house at that time, our back door, 30, 35. And we have copperheads, or had copperheads then. And I didn't want her to get off down in there and get copperhead bitten. So we were trying to call her back. And there's 2 trees back there that the way they're positioned together, they're pretty wide, probably about 3.5, 4 feet as you're looking at them. Well, my son went on one side of the house, one end of the house, and I went on the other calling the dog, trying to get her to come out of the woods. And I looked, and I know what an owl's eyes look like. I know what other animals' owls look like. There was a set of eyes, large eyes, sideways, looking out from behind a tree. One of those trees that were right there together. It was dark. I'm pretty blind at night. But that set of eyes was kind of that orangish, amber, reddish color. And they were not, owl's eyes are really round. This was not the really round eyes, more of the little kind of almond shape to it. I guess a good comparison to the sizes, like bicycle reflectors or reflectors you put on a mailbox, close to that size. And they were probably 4 to 5 inches apart. They were wide apart. I'm guessing. I'm not real good with that, but I'm guessing. Well, I looked at it and I said, look, I'm not going to bother you. We just need the puppy. Please leave the puppy alone. I called my son from the other side. I said, go around the house, come over here and stand by me. Let's get the dog in and get in the house. But I really do believe that was one looking out from behind a tree. We used to shop late at night because I've said it on another program. The hooligans are not at Walmart running around at 11 o'clock at night, okay? I don't have to worry about dodging people, the kids and stuff that are not minding their parents. We would come in and occasionally we would see something peeking out from behind a tree over on the northwest side of our yard. And I just tell my son, let's get in the house. He said, Mama, do you see that? Do you see those eyes? Because he became aware of it. We also would sit up late at night and watch TV during this same time period. He and I like science fiction. We like thrillers, things like that. Dad, he's more of a Hallmark man. But we would sit in our den, which is a ways from, him and where he's at in the house. And we would sit in here and have popcorn and watch the movies. And things would brush up against the house or slap the house, the backside. That part of the house did not have lights on it. The front yard, I jokingly say you can read a newspaper in. The backside is dark. Not now, but then it was very dark. But you could hear, it would slap the house. You could tell it was something hitting it. He would say, Mama, what's that? And I would say, oh, a deer probably just ran into the house. You tell your kids things to keep from scaring them out of their wits. I never saw it, but it went on. And it's kind of seasonal. It's spring and fall more than anything. And we would hear it just about every night that we were in here. And we would be in here a lot. He was homeschooled, so we set our own hours. So, we would be up late. We'd start our schoolwork at 9. So, like I said, we had our own little schedule that we did. And we would hear it quite often. Was it one? Was it not one? I kind of tend to believe that maybe it was. We did have a lot of deer that came on the property back then. We had chickens removed from our chicken coop. Early one morning, we went out to gather eggs, like 6:30, and he said, Mama, I got chickens missing. We started looking for the chickens, and we had maintained a portion of our neighbor's property before he fenced it. He pushed all that stuff back, by the way. I talked about it earlier. He didn't get to fence it until like 2019 or something is when he finally did that. So it was quite a few years between preparing it to be fenced and when he actually did it. But we found the grass was probably, Johnson grass, I guess. It was seeded probably 3.5 feet tall out in that corner. It was in the fall. And we found where something with large feet had stepped large strides down a row, an old fence row. The fence was there, old barbed wire, and there was honeysuckles all growing on it, vines. And it went down the edge of that towards the woods, and then there lay the chickens. They were just laying in the grass, like they had just been dropped there. Not moving, and the footprints went on past them, where the grass had been parted, and you could follow the steps all the way to the woods.
Were their necks broken or anything out of the ordinary?
No, they were perfectly fine.
Oh.
We picked them up and brought them back to the coop. A friend of mine said, I have never heard of them not killing the chickens. I said, those chickens seemed dazed. They were just sitting there in that tall grass. But the footsteps, I would guess, were probably 4 feet apart, 4 to 4.5. And it was large steps. Well, I mean, this was sporadic activity over, those years. We moved away. Well, we own the property, but my brother unexpectedly passed away in 2017. And my younger brother had passed away 10 years prior to that. And my mother had suffered a heart attack when the youngest one died. And then she was not feeling well when my other brother passed away. And she was nervous about living alone. So we decided that we would go over and spend some nights with her, my son and I, so she wasn't always by herself. Well, then she went to a cardiologist, and he told her she needed open heart surgery in August of that year. So at that point, we made the decision to just basically shut down the house and move over there to stay with her when she got home, take care of her. And I had turkeys and I had chickens here. And we left them here, and we would come back and gather our eggs and check on them and feed them and take care of them daily. And while Mom was in the hospital, and we did come back over and stay some while she was in the hospital, and while we didn't want to leave either place totally unoccupied. So good reason, because the first night we spent at my mother's without her there, we were broke into while we were there in bed. I met the person at the front door as he broke through the lock. And anyway, prior to my brother dying, he told us about seeing something on all fours come out of a bean patch and run back down it. So there could have been activity over there as well. And that her place is 3 or 4 miles from where we live. So we kept coming back over here to check on our turkeys and our chickens, and we would come back and our chickens would be out. Something was letting our chickens out. And we had 14 chickens, and we were averaging 10 to 13 eggs a day. And we were not getting any eggs. They were not molting. It was like we went from getting our eggs to no eggs. Our neighbor had a camera system, and she said, nobody's coming down the driveway. You don't have anybody going down the driveway but you guys to check on your place, and the mail carrier. And they didn't come into the yard. So something was getting all of our eggs, and something was letting our chickens out. And then they started letting our turkeys out. This happened several times. We'd round them all back up, put them up, and they had those little slide latches, like the little, I grew up calling them a hasp. You would just slide it, and you have to push it to a lock position. Well, my son was bad and he still is, to just slide it and not push it to the lock position. So you could just slide it and the door would swing open. And that's what we had. So after we dealt with rounding up chickens and turkeys for about 3 weeks, we moved them over to where my mom lived. And then we wound up having to get rid of them because they worried her constantly. But I wondered if it was coming up from the woods and helping itself to eggs. And we did go from 14 chickens down, I think, to 11 before we moved them. So we wound up with less chickens to move. We did lose 1 hen turkey out of all that, but we don't know if that was just from, her getting far enough away we couldn't find her. So we had that occur. But when we came back home in 2019, we fenced the entire property. Now I have a doe that brought her little fawns in the yard every year. And we still saw deer come on the property some, because we don't close our big gates. We have 2 gates and we leave them open. But the fence around the property is probably 5.5, 6 feet high with barbed wire on top. And it goes down almost, I think our fence stops 20 feet from the creek in the back fence. Well, in 20, I think it was the spring of 2019 is when I got the footprints. I have a 17-inch by 6-inch footprint. My blueberries were stripped. And it had been raining, and I got a trackway. I have a left footprint, a right footprint, and half of a left footprint again. The best footprint, I got a picture of it, was the right footprint. Before I could get to the house and get my cell phone to take a picture, my husband ran through it with his truck. And the treads on the truck are 1 inch, but it didn't, it damaged the footprint a little bit, but you could still see the depression. It depressed the soil deeper than the truck did.
Really?
So I know that yes.
Oh my goodness! Wow.
So I've kept that. I carry it on my phone all the time. But yeah, I've got it. When I first found it, I was cutting grass when I found it, and I was like, oh my gosh, such a clear footprint. And I broke my neck. And he had just said, I'm going to get diesel fuel. And I was like, okay. And I didn't think about him going around that part of the yard to go out the other gate. And he did. He circled the yard and went across it. So I have truck tread in the Bigfoot's print. But yeah, I have a really nice 17-inch by, like I said, the heel was about 6 inches across. Toes were clearly defined. The big toes, you could see where the soil was kind of a clay, sandy, loam area. And when it mashed its toes down, you kind of pushed a little chunk of the dirt up around the edge of the footprint. It's cool. I didn't cast it, didn't think about it, but I did get it on the phone. And then in the spring of the next, I believe it was 2020, my son got another footprint. It was a wet footprint that he took going into my shop. He looked out the door and said, somebody's trying to get in your shop. And he opened the door and said, hey, what are you doing? And he thought it was a person dressed in all black. It was raining. And it ran between two buildings. But then he went out to see if the door was indeed locked. And he came back in and got his phone. He said, Mama, there's a footprint out there that's weird. And it was 11 inches long. The big toe stuck out further than the other 4 toes. And it was 5 inches across at the heel.
When you're finding these prints, are you finding multiples of them as well?
Not on that one,
okay.
which I didn't go out there, so he didn't know to look around the base of the steps.
Yeah.
That one print was just up on the concrete steps.
Okay.
And it ran, like I said, between the two buildings that are there. The other one I found multiples. I found the 3. And they were just in that clay sandy that was still moist enough for it to compress there.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it was directly out at an angle from my blueberry bushes. Now, I tied nets the next year, I believe it was, over my blueberry bushes, bird netting. And we tied them down around the base to make sure nothing got the blueberries. We would tie them in the afternoons after we gathered the blueberries off of them. The next day, the nets would be loose, thrown on the ground. Now, a raccoon's not untying those and throwing them on the ground. The blueberry bushes are about 4.5 feet tall, 4 to 4.5 feet tall. And they're large bushes, and they're loaded. So something with fingers had to be untying those and throwing them off.
Yeah, absolutely. How far apart, again, were you said there were multiple footprints? Were they pretty far apart, or?
Oh, yeah, they were. They were. I couldn't have stepped that far, and I'm 5'11".
Mm-hmm.
And my husband couldn't have. I'm going to say, golly, it's been a while back, and I hadn't thought about measuring. I didn't think about measuring them. Probably 3.5, 4 feet, if every bit of that much, if not further than 4. And they were really far apart. Now, the one that was a half of one, it was the toes and about halfway back on the foot. I think the heel had hit a rock like sandstone that's out there, is why it didn't make an impression on that one. And then it stepped on, it was headed towards the eastern gate on our property. And there's woods right outside, probably 25 feet outside that, is a pine thicket that it could have gone into.
Man, if you were to draw a line connecting those footprints, what would the line look like?
Almost straight, but not exactly straight.
Okay. Wow. Wild.
I mean, they were just a little bit offset, but just not like ours. Yep.
When one hit the side of your house, were you able to check if there was a handprint on the side of the house at all?
We never found anything out there. Now, I had a handprint on my car.
Okay.
On the side of my car, and the glass, I drove a Flex, and the way I described it is it looked like it had been on top of the car and reached down its hand. It would have been its right hand onto the back window, the back side window of the car. The heel of the hand hit, and then it hit about 3 inches down from the corner, and the glass was cracked there. Then the fingers, the thumb ran parallel with the edge of the glass, and the fingers were down further on the glass. And I've had a lot of mobility issues, and my son went out and tried to take the picture, and bless his heart, he put his hand in such a manner that, and I've got a picture of the heel, kind of the heel of the hand and the thumb. But that car went through the car wash, and that greasy handprint stayed. But it was obvious what it was. It was a huge handprint. My hand is large. It was larger than my husband's. He's 6'4", and he has very large hands. And it was larger than his. I was just shocked. I thought it had gotten on the car, but then the more we looked, a friend, Greg House, said that he thought that maybe it had reached over the car versus be on it. And I said, well, that's kind of strange, but that's the only way I knew to describe it. Was it, like maybe had been on it, but there was no marks on the other side. There was just that one handprint. That was around 2020, because I got that car in 2019, so I think that was around 2020 when we found that. And I had to take Fantastic and rub it off to get it off.
Okay. Wow.
So it was greasy. But you could see, like all the ridges in our hands, you could see all that in that, especially in that heel print, the dermal ridges in it. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. And just the fact that it was really hard to clean it off. I mean, that is a big thing that you hear as well. It's always hard to clean those prints off.
And I had always said that I wanted to see another one, and I did. I didn't get to see it as close, but I have seen another one since. We normally, as I told you, I don't mean to be hesitant when I'm speaking, but I'm trying to think how to word everything and make it make sense. And I told you we had all the fruit trees and things. We watch our trees to get ready to go out and gather all of our fruit so I can preserve it. And we had a tree this previous year that I had told it, I talked to my trees. I said, if you do not produce fruit this next season, I'm cutting you down. Well, last year that thing was loaded. I mean, loaded. So I had gone by when they started turning the peaches, and kept checking it. And I finally told my husband, I said, I think Saturday we're going to gather all the peaches, and that way I can put them up. Well, went out there on Friday, picked one, and I said, yeah, we're going to gather them tomorrow. Went out Saturday to gather our peaches. There wasn't a peach on the tree. It was stripped clean. Okay, I have squirrels. I know what they do to my pecan trees. Squirrels don't strip a tree overnight. I don't have neighbors that come into the yard, open the gates, and come in and do things like that. The tallest part of the tree is maybe 12 feet, but it cleaned the tree. That's not the first time that we've had our apples and peach trees cleaned and our blueberry bushes. This has been happening since we've been back, and they were mature enough to produce well. We just don't, we're feeding whatever wildlife it is that's stripping them.
Wow, 12 feet is really high up. Yeah.
Yeah, I find that interesting that they just disappear overnight. So they don't mess with the figs, though. That's what I told someone else not long ago. I said, I can get a harvest of figs. They just don't seem to mess with the figs. But everything else, they strip. I have 2 apple trees. They don't produce great because they're older, but they do produce fruit. We never get the fruit off them. We'll get a couple. My son will get a couple as he goes by. They'll be stripped whenever they look like they're about ready. But the peaches is the big thing. I think I've gotten a peach harvest twice since my trees have been old enough for me to get peaches from them myself. They get stripped all in one night. They're gone. So tell me what's doing that.
As you said yourself, not everything's Bigfoot, but sometimes you hear things where it's like, okay, then what is it? What else is stripping a tree up to 12 feet tall? That's nuts. I don't know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But now the interesting thing, I said I'd always wanted to really see one again. In November, and we have maypops. Are you familiar with maypops?
No, I've heard of it. I just can't picture what it is.
Okay, they look kind of like a kiwi, only they're lighter color, and I can't think of the flower. I've gone blank on the flower. It's the fruit of a flowering vine. Well, we have elderberries as well. I also have elderberries that I planted to be tame for me to harvest, and then I have elderberries growing in other places on the property along with wild blueberries. Not blueberries, blackberries. In the back, we had made a burn pile, and it's overgrown on the ends around it. It's large, and there's some large elderberry bushes that I'd say that became trees. We had been watching, and there was a maypop vine, passion flower, I'm not sure. Anyway, it was loaded. There was probably about 50 of the maypops or so on it. And my son kept saying, what do they taste like? And I said, well, when they get ripe enough, I'll let you taste one. We'll gather them and you can taste them. Because I said, people eat the fruit when they're ripe. We came in November before Thanksgiving. We'd been shopping, and we were later coming home than normal for us. We'd usually try to get here before my husband gets home. And we pulled up, and our property slopes in the back. It used to be a field, and they had terraced rows or pasture. And so you can imagine how the terraces drop off, And so that's probably 2 to 3 terraces down back there where that's at. And I looked and I said, look, Jeffrey, we have a friend at the maypops. You could see head and shoulders, black, facing away from us. I said, quietly go in the house. Don't say anything. Just go in the house. And I said, don't let the dogs out. Just go in. It was down there eating the maypops. Well, we watched. He'd go back to our back window and look. I said, once it's gone from the maypops, you can let the dogs out. But don't let them out till it's away from there. It probably stayed down there about 15 minutes. We went down there on Saturday. A friend of mine came over. She wanted some seeds because she wanted to plant some. We went down just to see if there was any left for her to take home and dry and plant. There was 2 rotten ones on the ground, one further over in the pile, like toward the burn pile, that it hadn't gotten, and then a couple, maybe 5 total left on that whole vine. And like I said, there'd been about 50 hanging there. It cleaned those things up. I figured that was the closest the best I would see one again. That was it. Now, our dogs kept running the edge of the woods. They wouldn't go in the woods. And I have a little dachshund, and he loves to chase rabbits. He'll go anywhere. He didn't care. He stopped going into the woods around that time. He would just run the edge and bark. Run the edge and bark. Well, I think it was January. We have since, I told you before, the back was dark. We put up a ring camera system all around the house and added lights at the back door and the end towards the old chicken coop. And my mother-in-law has moved up here and living in a camper out at one end of our house. And so we've tried to light things and, make it more secure and friendly for her to be, if something happened and she needed to come in, she'd be able to see to come in at night. And vice versa for us to go out there. So really the only place that was dark was the north end of my home. Well, I was sitting here and the cameras kept going off and I heard a noise. It sounded like a tree knock, like you hear on TV, the tree knocks. And I thought, So I started with the front camera and started working my way around. And when I got to the northwest camera system, I turned it on and I was watching it on my phone and I enlarged the screen. And there stepped out from behind 2 trees and some privet hedge and just, smaller trees, underbrush and stuff. One stepped out. I lost it. I was like, oh my word. Well, all I could think was screenshot. And I kept trying to screenshot it and I couldn't get my screenshot to work. Because I would have gotten a perfect side silhouette of this beast standing there. I took off to the bedroom, woke my husband up. I said, you've got to look at this. So I showed it to him. My son came running in there and he got to see it. And they were seeing it as it was turning and walking back into the woods. And I was watching it and I immediately got on the phone with Greg. And I was like, Greg, you're not going to believe this. And I was just in shock. There's just no other way to express it. I just didn't know what to think. And I had heard whoops a few days before that. I didn't think about one coming up in the yard inside the fence. And I watched it. It went down about 8 to 10 feet down into the woods, and it kept leaning to the left. Leaning to the right. I could see it moving its right arm, and you could see it moving its head, and it was doing something down to the right-hand side. And I called him, and he was like, calm down. He was getting play-by-play of what this thing was doing. I was trying to get screenshots. I got 5 screenshots. They weren't great, but I was getting them off the camera system. I didn't know any other way to do it. He said, stay in the house. You're seeing something that people would die to see. People would just kill to see what you're seeing. I said, I don't know what it's doing. I said, it keeps leaning to the right. I can see its arm go down to the right. Occasionally it would stand up and I could see both arms out to the side, but I would see its hand go down to the right. And then I remembered there's 2 really large trees that were down there. And I said, do you think it's picking mushrooms off those trees? Because decaying trees, we have these brownish looking mushrooms growing on them. He said, I don't know. So I'm watching it. I watched it it started at 11:48. And I got the screenshots. And you could see a tree. There's a tree down that he was blocking the tree with his body. I couldn't see that part of the tree. And I would say if you were looking at the tree, it's probably 15 to 20 inches or so, maybe a little more across. He was blocking that. But he dug around in whatever he was doing close to an hour. And finally, it walked on down in the woods. It rained the next day. So my husband and I went down the following day and measured where it was. His head came out on the tree that, it came out next to. It measured 8 feet from the ground to where his head was, roughly the top of his head was. Where he was standing, there was 3 game trails that kind of converged there at those trees. So one went due west, one went behind those trees he walked out behind, and then there was another one that ran at an angle about halfway between the 2 of them, kind of southwest, back down towards the creek. being the time of year that it was in January, it's just leaf litter and stuff down there, so you couldn't see any footprints. But those trails were very well packed down. So
Wow.
Jeffrey went out. I know. I mean, I was blown away. I was like, I can't believe this. So I'm more worried about my fence, though. I mean, I'm like, do you think I need to get somebody to come walk my fence line? I can't walk that fence line because it's so steep. And the guy said, no, don't worry about it. At 8 feet tall, that fence is nothing for him to step over. He's not torn your fence up. And I was like, okay. So that was on the 15th, ended on the 16th. On the 17th, we had 4 chickens in a coop, and Jeffrey had added 1 young hen to it to make it 5. He went out the next morning and found that the youngest, the baby, well, she was probably 16 weeks old. That hen was gone. No trace of her anywhere. Just gone out of the coop. Again, I mentioned earlier, he doesn't lock the little slide latch. Didn't mess, and these hens are not laying. We just don't have the heart to do anything with them. We're just letting them exist. They're kind of pets at this point. But that youngest hen was gone. No sign of her anywhere. No feather trail, nothing. She's gone. We've never found any remnants of her anywhere. On our way out, we noticed about 0.2 of a mile from our home, there is stick structures off the main road. My husband had seen them, and then he pointed them out to me. I got a couple good pictures. There's some trees that are every bit of 20 feet long, broken in some of these structures, large around. Like if you put your hands together, you couldn't get them around those trees. And we've noticed that those structures, they have increased in number since they've started clearing some land back behind there.
This is really wild stuff. Really,
I know, and this
wild.
is recent, and it's just blown my mind.
This is like this
year, then on
right?
the 28th, this is this year, and then on January 28th, we were leaving to go somewhere, and we went outside, and we were just running up to Walmart, and it was 7. We don't live that too awfully far, to make a run up there. Around 7:48, I had a loud whoop. I stepped out the end door. Well, either on January 31st or February 1st, I can't remember which night it was. Around 10:30, I just got a feeling I needed to check the cameras. Now, this one really blew me away. So I started checking I checked the in camera first, and it had been recommended that we go ahead and get a bright light there. Well, my husband hadn't found the one he wanted to put up there. He was checking different lows and stuff, to find them. And so I started checking the cameras, and when I got to that back corner one again, and I always enlarge them so I can look at the wood line. There was a deer up in the air, a deer head. The first thing I saw was like the neck and head of a deer. And I was like, is that a deer on top of something's head? So I blew it up. And it took me a second to realize what was going on. The deer was being slung from side to side, the head was. Just rapidly, it went left, right, left, right. I probably watched it get slung 5 times. I could see its eye open, its ears, having it blown up. Now, my husband says it's between 90 and 100 feet from that position of the camera on the eave to the edge of the woods there. It was right there on that same game trail, that same area where the one stepped out a few weeks before. I realized that Bigfoot was apparently slinging that deer back and forth and breaking its neck. And as quickly as it all started, it went down in the woods with it. I sat here with my mouth hanging open, and of course I called my friend again. I'm like, you are not going to believe what I just watched. I said, I cannot believe this. And then I go to, I'm worried, is that my doe that he's killed? The one that brought her babies in the yard all these years. But to see that happen, there's just no words. There's just no words. I was just completely dumbfounded.
Wow, you've got such a really good opportunity, right? It's just, it's crazy.
And I'm like, why? But now I've said this. I don't believe in our household, we've discussed this. I don't think the one that stepped out and the one that did that to the deer is the same one that's maybe been on the property in the years past. Because that one that stepped out was enormous. I mean, it was enormous. It had to be 4 feet across when it turned. I got some screenshots. I mentioned it before. Spencer took one and cleaned it up. And it looks, you could see a large mass, and then you see the blackberry briars underbrush, good 3.5, 4 feet tall. I mean, of that, and then you see the mass above it. It is a huge boy. I say boy, I don't know, but it's a huge Bigfoot. It's really huge, and it gets even crazier. I don't know how much time I have, but we went on February 4th. We left here. My husband was supposed to pick dinner up. We left here at 7:20. We decided we would run to town and just grab a bite at a restaurant and come back. We got back at 8:40. Where we were going, we knew we wouldn't be gone long. My husband headed directly in the house as soon as we got here. My son and I got out on our side and walked around the back of our vehicle. I'd had gravel delivered a few days prior, but we had a pile put here at the end of my house, probably 6 feet from the corner of my house. I'd had a decent-sized little pile. I wanted to rake it around, pull it up next to the sidewalk, that kind of thing. So I asked the guy to dump me a pile there. As I walked around, I looked down, and I said, oh, my word, look. Right in the top of that pile was a huge footprint. You could see it compressed down in the gravel. I got a picture of it. I had on Crocs, and I took off my Croc, and I set my heel of the Croc in it, and the footprint's about 4.5 inches. My Croc measures 12 inches from the heel to the toe. I measured it with a ruler, and about 4 inches past that is where the big toe ended on the footprint. So I took one without it. You could see the depression. The depression in the loose gravel went down about 1 inch. On the other side of it was another footprint that had kind of slid in the gravel. And the odor that hit you, Jeremiah, would have made you throw up. My husband said he didn't smell it, but that's nothing unusual. He has sinus issues. But my son and I both were out there going, what is that? It is horrible. It was this just gut-wrenching old urine smell is the only way I can describe it. Like you went into an old gas station that hadn't been cleaned in forever. It was just horrid. Burn your eyes horrid. Then it looked like something had urinated a line out from that in the gravel. And I went inside and got a paper towel and picked one of the rocks up, and it smelled as well, and put it back down. I didn't think about bagging it. I didn't think about doing anything. I was just shocked. The footprints, we found heel marks from the edge of our grass, across the fresh gravel, just the heel impressed till it got to that pile, then out into the front yard toward the chicken coop. We moved them out towards the apple trees. No chickens were harmed or messed with then. So immediately I text my friend Greg again, got on the phone with him, and was telling him what was going on. And I said, I just can't believe this. And we kept talking and talking, and we talked a long time. And I had my door open, the indoor, and it had started misting rain. Whatever that was, that line that I said looked like something had urinated, like 4-foot stream of urine across there on the gravel. did not go away when the rain hit it. It was still there when the mist and rain had wet all the gravel. So, and I was telling him that. I said, does that mean it's like oily or something? I mean, I'm ignorant here in some areas, so I'm being honest. I was like, wouldn't it, if it had been a human urine, it would have washed off of them, right? It didn't. It stayed there. It just got darker when the other hit. When the misty sprinkles, whatever you want to call it, rain hit. Well, we were talking, and I said, I hear something on my ramp. I have a handicap ramp built to my door. And I said, I hear something on the ramp. But I didn't jump up then and go look. But while I was talking to him, I yelled at my son. I said, you need to get the dogs in. And he was like, I don't want to go out there by myself. That thing's been in the yard. I don't want to go out there. So he said, tell him to take a bright light and go out there. So he opens the door, goes out with a light, goes out there and gets the dogs, comes back. I go out on the ramp. I turn around, and there on the ramp is a footprint. It's not like the toes in the heel, like a solid footprint, but you could see if you could imagine like wet hair, stringy, how you can sling a mop on the floor and it leaves those marks.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it looked like on the ramp. It had been, I almost get choked up thinking about this. It had been standing within 3 feet of my screen door while I was on the phone.
Goodness.
This is all in the same night. We now have an extremely bright light out there. Mm-hmm. But we're still getting pebbles thrown at the end of the house, or rocks or sticks. There is a 3-foot stick out there now that I saw yesterday that wasn't out there before. Like it's maybe 1 inch in diameter. That's probably hit the house and landed where it is, about 4 feet from the house. So I've expressed it to them. I'm concerned that this one is more, I don't want to use the word aggressive, inquisitive. Would that be a good term?
I'd say curious and not afraid, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, my son has been afraid to go out at night to get the dogs out of their kennel. The kennel's kind of halfway between the house and the woods. And a few nights later, he was like, I don't want to go out there. And I said, I'll go with you. So he had the light, the one that, the bright one. I was right behind him within 2 feet of him. He went out, stepped on the ramp, turned around, almost ran over me. He said, Mama, that thing is at the corner of the dog kennel. Its head is above, there are those 6x10 panels. He said its head is above, it's on the tree side. He said its head's above the dog kennel, and it just took off running. He said, I'm not going to get the dogs. I said, well, you've got to go get them because I don't want them left out there, with it in the yard. But he came up to the corner of the dog kennel. Then we found the dog kennel was on that side, was pulled about 3 feet at the top. It didn't bend the where the panels joined together. It was pulled probably 3 feet towards the woods. Well, the whole panel was pulled 3 feet or 4 towards the woods, like it was trying to figure out how to get into it.
Yeah, right.
And then we came home from church the Sunday after that, and the side closest to the house was leaning in towards the dogs.
Okay. Yeah.
So a lady in Tennessee said, well, the time of year it is, it may be looking for some food.
Mm-hmm.
So that is, other than hearing the little pebbles, I mean, that pretty much brings us up to where we're at now. We've been listening, and I take that back. We burnt some things the other night at dusk, and Jeffrey and I both watched it on the camera. It was down behind the tree, peeking out from behind the tree while he was burning.
All right. Sandra, this is wild. Yeah.
It's wild.
Yeah. in the last, we have a few minutes left, but I really want to talk about this real. So, are you watching this security camera on a phone?
Yes,
Okay. So what
I
kind of
do.
phone do you have?
Well, at the time that I was trying to do the screenshots,
Yeah.
I had a Samsung Galaxy
Okay.
S24. It was a not nicer phone, but I'm used to an iPhone,
Right.
and I couldn't figure out how to get my screenshots. And I finally, my husband that night that I did get some screenshots, he said, "You got to push this and this, and you get your screenshots." So I think I got 5, and one of them, like I said, I mentioned in Spencer Jameson, cleaned up and got a pretty good backside of one of that one. And then I now, as of last week, I'm back to an iPhone.
Okay.
So I'm kind of excited about that because I can handle it better. And if I see it on the camera again, and then Greg suggested that if I see it back there again, to take my son's phone, which I think is a pretty good idea, and film it off my phone.
That's pretty much what I was going to say. Or you should be able to, on your own iPhone, slide down and do a screen recording of what's on your screen so you can get the
Right.
actual video. Either way, yeah.
I can do that now on that.
Okay,
You're
perfect.
right. You're right.
Perfect. Yeah. That would be great.
Yeah.
Oh man.
But I haven't had the phone. I haven't had any activity since we got the phones changed back.
Right. Yeah.
So none that I've caught anyway. But I mean, this is just, and the stick structures that I mentioned earlier have ramped up. There was like 4 or 5 over there 6 months ago, and now there's probably 12, 13. And there's also a blind that I got a picture of that's over there.
Oh man, this
just blows my mind.
Oh yeah.
I have some people that say they're going to come. I don't really want these people that want to. They say they want to investigate, but then they come armed to the hilt, and you know what they want.
Yeah.
I don't want them to bother them because everybody always says, "What do you think they are?" And I said, "I think they're some form of human." I said, "I don't really think they're a gorilla because I've looked too closely in its face." I just don't think so. I don't believe that they have portals. I don't believe they transport. I don't believe all that. But I do think that they probably have abilities you and I don't because they've survived in the wild so long.
No, they're great at surviving.
You know, they know how to camouflage. They know how to hide behind things. You know, they possess those abilities. And I do believe that. But I just don't want somebody to come here hunting them. Let's put it that way. I don't.
Absolutely. And that's important for you to know as the landowner, and you can hopefully keep those certain individuals from coming onto your property, you know. So,
and I've had a neighbor in the past that saw them come across my property and onto the neighbor's property. Well, he watched them at night. I forgot to mention that. And he would sit out and smoke late at night. He was a renter, and he would sit on the porch and smoke. And he said, "I hate to bring this up, but," and he said, "You're going to think I'm crazy." I said, "No, I don't think you're crazy." He said, "It's huge. It's black." But he didn't describe it as being real wide. He just said it was tall. I think it's the younger one. I keep saying it's the younger one because we've seen the smaller footprint and then we see the larger footprint. I think we've had one that's kind of grown up around somewhere close by. Then my other neighbor, the neighbor next to me, said that she thought that there was a cave down on the backside of their property. But it gets so steep that they just don't walk down there. And we don't walk down there either because it's so steep.
Yeah, exactly.
Going towards the creek. So I said, well, I don't know. You know, we have limestone outcroppings all around here, and there's bluffs and stuff. So you don't know. And you don't know what comes up the creek from the larger area either.
Oh, man. Miss Sandra, you've got some wild stuff going on. It has been just an intense conversation with you. You've got some stuff going on. Thankfully, you're talking to people like Spencer and Greg and Misty that really know the down south Bigfoot and the booger action. And I know that people can also watch your interviews over on the Woodwalkers channel, which is awesome. I love it. But yeah, please keep me, in the loop, but keep them in the loop first. I mean, they're the boots on the ground guys down there.
Well, I told Greg he looks a lot like my brother that passed away in 2017. Yeah. So I tell him he's a brother from another mother.
Absolutely.
But, when something happens, I'm like, Greg.
Right.
Because I'm panicking.
Right.
But this has just been a wild 6 months, since when we saw that one in November, or not quite 6 months. But, yeah, since the first of the year, because normally December, January, it's quiet. That's why I'm saying this is a different one. Mm-hmm. It's quiet, and it just disturbs me that it doesn't have a problem coming up to the door, the house, and it did come up with the bright light. Once the light was up, it came up.
That's not good.
So hey,
yeah,
I don't want to say aggressive, but like I said, inquisitive, like you said, curious.
Yep.
So I guess it remains to be seen if it goes away or if it keeps hanging around or what's going to happen.
Yeah, you guys are okay. Just be aware. Keep being aware of what's going on, and keep in touch with Greg for sure. But yeah, Miss Sandra, thank you so much for chatting today, and I hope we will stay in touch. But yeah.
Oh, I'll be glad to keep you. I'll send you a text once in a while and let you know what's going on. Right.
Thank you so much. Pleasure talking to you today, and good luck down
Same
there.
here. Thanks for hearing my experiences. It's nice to be able to talk to somebody that doesn't say, "Oh, well, you're just an idiot."
Definitely not. Yes, ma'am. All right. We'll talk later. All right.
All right. Thanks, Jeremiah.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Just wanted to take a minute to say thank you truly for listening to this episode of the Bigfoot Society podcast. Sandra's story is the kind that lingers, not just because of how close that window encounter was, but because of how long it's followed her. From that first face-to-face moment at 13 to footprints, handprints, and stripped peach trees decades later, it's clear that something in those Alabama woods never left. Huge thanks to Sandra for bravely sharing what she saw and continuing the conversation that so many are afraid to start. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to us on YouTube, click that bell so you never miss an encounter, and share this with someone who loves a good mystery, especially if they're from the South. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and make sure you're following the show. And if you had an encounter of your own, shoot me an email at bigfootsociety@gmail.com. I want to hear your story. Until next time, keep your eyes open, trust your gut, and never stop asking what else might be out there, and see you in the woods.